Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly into one of those curiously sleepy corners of history. Napoleon Bonaparte, yes, that Napoleon, and his socks. You picture him standing in a dimly lit room, candlelight flickering across polished boots, while behind the grandeur, there's a drawer, carefully organized, each pair of socks folded with precision that would put modern closet organization influencers to shame. You think, wait, the guy who rewrote Europe's borders also spent time fussing with hosiery? Yes, exactly. And you probably won't survive this tale without yawning halfway through. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you do, leave a quick comment with your location and the local time you're listening. I love picturing this sleepy little community stretched out across the world, tuning in from beds, couches, and hammocks. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin with the island of Corsica, where young Napoleone Bonaparte roams barefoot more often than not. Shoes and socks aren't exactly standard fare for children there. Families are practical. Fabrics are expensive, and playtime in rocky fields usually shreds anything too fine. His mother, Letizia, must have sighed more than once as she tried to keep little feet covered, only to find socks mismatched, one damp from puddle stomping, the other missing entirely. Already, you imagine her muttering, "One day this boy will conquer Europe, but first, maybe he can learn to keep track of his laundry." The historical fact that frames this is simple. Corsica, in the mid-18th century, was far from wealthy, and clothing was precious. Families counted each garment carefully, repairing socks until they were more patch than fabric. A quirky tidbit? In Corsican folk tradition, children were sometimes warned that failing to care for clothing angered household spirits. So perhaps Napoleon's eventual obsession with tidy socks wasn't just military discipline. It was superstition lingering from childhood whispers. Historians still argue whether his later meticulousness came from genuine neatness, early poverty, or simply the grinding discipline of French military schools. You picture him at age 9 when he leaves for mainland France. His travel trunk isn't bursting with riches. Instead, a few shirts, trousers, and yes, socks. Woolen, itchy, already darned. He clutches them as if they're both armor and reminder of home. Imagine him on that ship, waves rolling beneath, the smell of salt clinging to fabric. His socks, folded clumsily, slide around the chest with every swell. He might not care now, but the seeds of irritation are planted. Disorder, mismatch, dampness. You know how tiny annoyances can grow into lifelong habits. At the Brienne Military Academy, the other boys sneer at his Corsican accent and provincial manners. You, walking silently behind him in your mind's eye, see him focusing on small rituals to maintain dignity. If the noble kids laugh at his speech, at least they won't laugh at wrinkled socks. He smooths them out, lines them at the foot of his bed, tries to pretend this small order compensates for chaos outside. Isn't it funny how socks, so dull, so ordinary, become symbols of control? Of course, socks in 18th century France aren't today's cheap cotton multi-packs. They're costly, hand-knitted, or machine-loomed with care. Colors matter, materials matter. Fine silk socks mark status. Wool is utilitarian. Napoleon, even as a boy, notices these signals. He files it away. What you wear on your feet tells others who you are. Later, when he's emperor, he'll deploy that lesson with precision. For now, though, he's a teenager, staring at neatly paired socks before lights out, whispering to himself that he will not be defined by mockery. There's something slightly comedic in picturing the future emperor of Europe huddled over socks, but it fits. Every great story starts in the small details. You can even picture a modern reality show camera zooming dramatically onto a drawer. Little did anyone know, this obsession with order would march straight into history. You chuckle quietly, then let the image soften. A boy, a candle guttering low, and the fabric folded gently beneath his fingertips. Corsica remains in his memory as both freedom and scarcity. The barefoot childhood, the patched socks, the uneven pairs, all of it becomes background music to his drive for order. You imagine him years later, still feeling the sting of cold floorboards under naked feet, vowing never again to let small discomforts undermine him. And if you've ever stepped in a cold puddle while wearing socks, you know how such a vow might feel eternal. By now, you're starting to feel that heavy-eyed rhythm of repetition. Socks, folded and unfolded, lined up, missing, patched again. Childhood days blur into academy nights. Disorder and control circle each other, and you can already sense that this small boy's irritation with laundry will ripple outward, shaping how he commands armies, how he organizes empires, how he even spends his exile counting pairs left in his drawer. You trail after him into the stone corridors of the Brienne Military Academy, where the air is damp with chalk dust and the smell of boots drying after drills. Here, socks are not just personal comfort. They're part of the uniformed life, subject to inspection as much as muskets and haircuts. You watch as the cadets line up beside their trunks, lids creaking open, and inspectors peer inside like detectives solving the world's least exciting mystery. Shirts folded, trousers stacked, and socks, always paired, never missing, displayed as if they were medals themselves. Napoleon, young and sharp-eyed, learns quickly. If his Corsican accent betrays him in conversation, if classmates call him the little corporal in tones dripping with scorn, at least his trunk can be immaculate. He smooths his socks flat, pairs them heel to heel, and arranges them in a neat gradient of wear, newest on the left, thinnest, and most patched on the right. It's not regulation, strictly speaking, but it's his private system. In this tiny kingdom of cloth, he rules. The historical fact is straightforward. Military academies in late 18th century France emphasized discipline down to the smallest detail. Cadets were judged on bed making, garment folding, and trunk arrangement almost as fiercely as they were on mathematics or fencing. A quirky tidbit: there are records of cadets being docked privileges for leaving socks rumpled, the idea being that sloppy fabric foretold sloppy battlefields. Historians still argue whether these inspections were genuinely effective in shaping soldiers' discipline, or whether they were simply rituals of humiliation designed to break youthful arrogance. You can almost hear the soft thump of an inspector's cane tapping on the trunk edge, pausing at Napoleon's precise layout. A slight nod, perhaps. No words. Just the acknowledgement that here is a boy who takes the ritual seriously. While others roll eyes or shove garments into piles at the last moment, he seems to have meditated over every fold. His classmates may not notice, but Napoleon himself feels it. Control is intoxicating. At night, The dormitory hums with muffled laughter, whispered gossip, the creak of beds. You watch him, hunched by the low light of a lantern, rechecking his socks even when there is no inspection scheduled. One pair shows signs of wear, heel thinning to transparency. He threads a needle clumsily, trying to patch it. The stitches are uneven, but the effort matters. For a boy often mocked as an outsider, here is a space where diligence cannot be mocked. It simply exists. Think of how many socks you've lost to mysterious laundromat voids. Imagine a boy growing into a man determined that such chaos should never touch him again. There's your sleepy comedy for tonight. Napoleon, destined to command tens of thousands, begins his empire by waging war against lost hosiery. You drift forward to the Academy's laundry days. Cadets carry baskets of linen and socks down to the wash areas, where soap suds and steam fog the air. Napoleon lingers, eyes sharp, noting which fabrics fray first, which dyes bleed. He is not yet thinking of continental blockades, but you can sense the seed planted: supply, maintenance, resources. Wars are not only won by cavalry charges, they are won by dry feet. He will never forget this. The socks themselves, of course, are rough wool, scratchy against skin, especially after repeated washings. They shrink, warp, and stretch into unflattering shapes. Yet he lines them up as if they were treasures, because in this life of cold stone dormitories and endless drills, control over socks is control over self. It is almost tender, the way he presses them flat, smoothing out the ridges with careful fingers. One night you imagine him lying awake, staring at the ceiling beams. Around him, boys snore and shift in sleep. His thoughts tumble: how to escape mockery, how to rise, how to be seen as more than a small Corsican boy with a foreign accent. And then, oddly, his eyes flick toward the trunk at the foot of his bed. Inside, socks in perfect order. It soothes him, a small lullaby of order against the noisy uncertainty of adolescence. Humor creeps in here. Because truly, can you picture an emperor's destiny being comforted by the thought, "At least my socks are in line"? Yet it fits. Human beings cling to small rituals, especially when power feels distant. For him, folding socks becomes rehearsal for folding nations. The academy years roll forward. Inspections continue. His records mark him as serious, studious, perhaps even grim. But you, drifting just behind him in this quiet narrative, see the glimmer of obsession forming. Where others toss socks into trunks like firewood, Napoleon arranges, rearranges, rechecks. He isn't only learning geometry and artillery, he's training himself in the art of invisible control, the discipline no one claps for, but which forms the skeleton of empires. The candlelight flickers, the socks rest in their neat lines. And you feel your own eyelids grow heavier. Isn't it comforting, in a strange way, to imagine the boy who would one day stride across Europe, first proving himself not with cannons, but with wool folded just so? You march alongside him now, boots sinking into the muddy earth of his early campaigns in Italy. The year is 1796, and the young general, barely 26, is suddenly in command of a ragged army that looks more like a parade of scarecrows than the professional force he dreamed of. The soldiers' coats are threadbare, their shoes often nothing more than stitched scraps, and their socks, when they have them at all, are stiff with dirt or torn into ribbons. You trudge with them over rutted roads, the air smelling of smoke, sweat, and desperation, and you notice how Napoleon's eyes catch on the smallest details. a man limping from wet socks, another cutting strips of cloth to wrap raw ankles. It might seem petty, but he makes a mental note. He, too, has his trunk with him, the same discipline carried from the academy. Shirts folded, coats carefully brushed, and socks, of all things, still neatly lined. While soldiers improvise with rags, he insists his own feet remain clean and dry, because he knows what you also know. Blisters and frostbite don't sound glamorous, but they can take down more men than cannon fire. The historical fact here is clear. During the Italian campaign, Napoleon's army often survived on ingenuity rather than proper supply lines. His leadership turned desperate conditions into victories, but the soldiers' lack of clothing and footwear was a constant complaint. The quirky tidbit: some troops, unable to get proper socks, boiled strips of old uniforms to soften them and wrapped their feet like makeshift bandages. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's insistence on personal neatness was a practical necessity or just the stubborn vanity of a young commander trying to distance himself from his ragged men. Imagine the sight: officers waiting outside his tent, discussing strategy, while inside he kneels over a wash basin, wringing out his socks with meticulous care. Soap bubbles drift in the lantern light, water sloshes, and he hangs the fabric on a rope strung between tent poles. Outside, musket fire pops in the distance, yet inside his canvas world, the greatest battle is against mud and damp. You can almost laugh. Europe trembling at his campaigns, and here he is, fussing like someone preparing for a dinner date instead of war. You walk further into those battlefields, boots squelching in puddles. Soldiers curse under their breath, shifting on sore feet. Napoleon notices, and though he cannot conjure new supplies from thin air, he urges discipline. Dry socks by the fire, rotate pairs if possible. Never march in soaked fabric if it can be avoided. His tone is sharp, but beneath it, you sense the echo of Brienne's inspections. What was once about impressing officers now becomes survival. At night, after victories, the camp erupts with cheer. Fires crackle, bread bakes, wine is passed around. Yet inside his tent, Napoleon returns again to his little trunk. He folds, smooths, realigns. The socks lie there, mute symbols of order and chaos. You, watching, feel a strange calm in this repetitive motion, as though folding fabric were a meditation, a reminder that not everything bends to war's madness. The Italian campaign becomes a turning point. His strategies dazzle Europe, but he also learns the brutal lesson that supply lines matter as much as cannons. Men desert if their feet rot. Victories collapse if soldiers can't march. He begins to speak more about logistics, drilling aides with questions about uniforms, shoes, and socks. Some sneer. Why should a general care about hosiery? Yet those same skeptics limp on raw feet, while he stands steady, neatly dressed as if untouched by hardship. It's partly illusion, partly truth, and entirely deliberate. Picture the scene one morning after heavy rain. The ground is thick mud, the air damp. Officers gather to receive orders, expecting a weary commander. Instead, Napoleon strides out in gleaming boots, trousers crisp, socks hidden but immaculate beneath. It's not just vanity, it's theater. By appearing unshaken, he convinces others they, too, can endure. His socks, clean and dry, are invisible actors in this play of morale. There's humor in it, too. You imagine a soldier whispering to another, "He must have a secret warehouse of socks somewhere," while they wring out their own ragged pairs. And maybe Napoleon, overhearing, hides a smirk. After all, perception is power. But you also glimpse the tender side. In letters to Josephine, he occasionally complains of discomfort, muddy clothes, damp weather, aching feet. He doesn't describe the socks in detail, but you know they're there between the lines, folded and waiting, symbols of the order he tries to maintain even when love, war, and destiny swirl around him. One night, after a skirmish, he sits quietly by the lantern glow. His boots are off, socks spread out to dry. He studies maps while fabric steams in the heat. You feel the rhythm. War outside, socks drying inside, the world balanced between chaos and routine. And in that quiet, you sense the boy from Corsica is still there, the one who found comfort in lining fabric just so. The mud thickens, the victories pile up, and Europe begins to whisper his name with awe and fear. But beneath the legends, there is this quiet, almost comical image. Napoleon, commander of men, master of strategy, folding socks in a tent while thunder shakes the sky. You blink against the blinding desert sun, sand whipping at your face as Napoleon's Egyptian campaign unfolds around you. The air tastes of dust and grit, the kind that clings to your teeth and coats your tongue. You stumble after him, watching French soldiers trudge through dunes, their boots filling with sand at every step. The problem of socks takes on a new shape here, not mud and rain anymore, but the endless invasion of grains that grind skin raw. Napoleon himself, ever the creature of routine, still insists on neatness. His valet shakes his head as he lays out the general's socks inside the tent, far from tidy stone barracks now. But the ritual remains. White cotton socks, so crisp in Paris, now turn yellow-brown in the desert within minutes. You picture Napoleon frowning, brushing at them with his hands, muttering as if socks could somehow be protected from the Sahara. The historical fact here is this. The Egyptian expedition of 1798 wasn't only about battles. It was also about hardship from climate and environment. Soldiers collapsed from heat, suffered from lack of supplies, and fought an invisible war against the desert itself. The quirky tidbit? Some of Napoleon's men experimented with camel hair socks, woven from whatever fibers they could gather, claiming the scratchy texture actually kept sand from grinding too deep into their skin. Historians still argue whether these improvisations made any real difference, or were just acts of desperation disguised as ingenuity. Inside Napoleon's tent, you watch the transformation of his sock ritual. No longer is it about clean folds and perfect lines. Now, it's survival. He tests fabrics, rubbing them between thumb and forefinger, searching for something breathable but strong enough to resist sand. One aide reports that local weavers recommend layering socks, one thin pair beneath, one thicker pair above, creating a barrier. Napoleon listens, skeptical, but he orders trials. Imagine him, the man who will one day crown himself emperor, commanding experiments in footwear like a fussy tailor. By day, the soldiers march across blinding landscapes, pyramids looming in the distance like mirages. By night, socks are shaken furiously, clouds of sand puffing out with each snap. You sit there with them, hearing the rasp of fabric, the grumble of men cursing dunes more than enemies. Napoleon, however, keeps his calm, even joking once that sand is just Europe's mud with ambition. You smile at the line. It's dry, absurd, but you sense the morale boost it offers. The desert heat does strange things. Cotton socks shrink when repeatedly washed in scarce water and dried too fast under burning sun. Some soldiers abandon socks altogether, wrapping feet in linen strips instead. Napoleon refuses. For him, socks are non-negotiable, as much a part of uniform as epaulets. He sees them as a small line of defense, not only against sand, but against the creeping disorder that heat and fatigue bring. One evening, you picture him seated near a brazier, legs stretched, while his valet beats dust out of socks with mechanical precision. He glances at maps of the Nile Delta, eyes tracing strategy, while his ears follow the rhythmic thwack of cloth. To him, it is more than cleaning, it's reassurance. If socks can be restored, perhaps order itself can be restored in this strange land. The soldiers gossip, of course. Around campfires, they laugh that their commander obsesses over hosiery while they wrestle with scorpions and fleas. Yet they also notice something. His discipline extends beyond himself. He orders regular laundry days, insists on foot inspections, and punishes neglect. Some grumble, but others quietly admit it helps. Blisters heal, infections lessen, marches become bearable. In the strangest way, his sock fussiness keeps them alive. You imagine a particular day near the pyramids. Soldiers prepare for battle, muskets gleaming in harsh light. Napoleon, before mounting his horse, kneels to adjust his socks inside his boots. A mundane gesture, almost laughable in the grand theater of war. Yet there he is, taking that extra moment, convinced that small comfort fuels great victories. You can't help but chuckle. History remembers speeches about glory, not the man tugging at his socks before facing Mamluks. And still, the desert resists. Even folded neatly, even layered carefully, socks stiffen with salt from sweat. They rub, chafe, and fray. Napoleon notices, of course. He scolds supply officers, demands better shipments from Europe, complains in his letters. Yet you can feel the futility. Socks were never designed for this landscape. It's like wearing a powdered wig to climb a dune. Civilized fabric against an untamed world. Late at night, as the stars blaze with unnatural brilliance over the desert, he writes in his journal. Strategy fills the page, but off to the side, small notes appear. Need more cloth. Sand in everything. Soldiers without socks complain. Imagine historians centuries later poring over these scraps, arguing whether the notes were practical or symbolic, evidence of genius logistics or signs of misplaced obsession. The debate goes on, but you, sitting here in the desert silence, know both can be true. As dawn breaks, the men shuffle into formation, their feet wrapped, blistered, or padded. Napoleon mounts his horse, socks hidden beneath polished boots, still somehow immaculate in his mind. He rides out, and you trail behind, realizing that in the long march of history, socks, simple, fragile, laughably ordinary, have become part of his armor against both chaos and sand. You step quietly into the softer light of Paris evenings now, away from deserts and mud, and find Napoleon in a different battlefield entirely, his own drawing room, where Josephine waits with her famously amused smile. The candles glow, the curtains are heavy with perfume, and on the chaise she reclines like a queen of calm disorder. You, standing off to the side, notice his socks neatly folded on a nearby chair, freshly washed, smelling faintly of lavender. Josephine, of course, notices them too, and teases him. She tilts her head, laughter warm but pointed, and says something like, "My dear, you marshal your socks with more precision than your marshals in the field." He frowns, not in anger, but in mock embarrassment, adjusting his cuffs as if to say, "Well, someone must keep order." You watch this exchange, intimate and comical, two opposites playing out their love in little rituals. She thrives in social whirlwinds, silk gowns, and scandalous stories. He clings to schedules, folded fabric, and military neatness. Together, they clash and complement, socks included. The historical fact is simple. Josephine de Beauharnais was known for her charm, extravagance, and sometimes chaotic finances, while Napoleon preferred frugality and discipline. Their marriage was a balancing act between these traits. The quirky tidbit? Josephine reportedly teased him not only about his short stature, but also about his obsessive habits, like inspecting his wardrobe late at night, ensuring every garment was in place. Historians still argue whether she found his routines endearing or exasperating, whether her laughter was gentle affection or a veiled critique. One evening you picture clearly. The house is quiet, servants dismissed. Josephine lounges, fanning herself lazily, while Napoleon sits with his trunk open, socks arranged in perfect pairs. She laughs outright, covering her mouth with delicate fingers. You would conquer the world just to guarantee fresh socks, wouldn't you? He glances up, half smiling, half defensive, muttering about the importance of discipline. Yet the more he explains, the more she teases, until both are laughing. It becomes almost a game. She hides a pair once, tucks them beneath cushions, waits for his irritation. When he eventually discovers them, she declares, "Ah, the great general, defeated by hosiery." You can't help but grin, imagining the man who terrified monarchs reduced to rummaging through furniture for a missing sock. He takes it in stride, mostly, though you notice the way he quickly refolds the pair once found, restoring order as if the world itself were at stake. The room itself seems to encourage contrast. Josephine fills it with plants, exotic flowers, and soft draperies. Chaos in beauty, beauty in chaos. Napoleon answers with polished boots lined precisely, socks rolled just so, gloves stacked. The visual clash mirrors their personalities. And yet, despite her teasing, Josephine indulges him. She orders fine silk stockings as gifts, sometimes embroidered with delicate patterns, ensuring his drawers never lack abundance. She may laugh, but she also enables. One night, the laughter turns softer. She touches his hand while he folds, saying, "Perhaps you keep them so carefully because everything else slips beyond control." It strikes him, and you too, as a rare moment of clarity. War, politics, public opinion, these whirl like storms. But socks? Socks stay where he puts them, at least if Josephine isn't playing tricks. You drift further into their domestic rhythm. Dinner parties end, carriages roll away, silence falls. He retreats to his study or to his closet, fussing over clothes, while Josephine hums in another room. The soldiers in Italy had mocked his neatness. Now his own wife teases. But behind both, there's a strange admiration. Few men of power cared for such details, and perhaps that, in its absurd way, is part of his magnetism. Imagine him preparing for a grand ball. Josephine sparkles in jewels, her gown shimmering. Napoleon, meanwhile, inspects socks as carefully as medals. White silk tonight, no stains, no creases. He pulls them on slowly, ensuring they sit smooth inside gleaming shoes. He doesn't realize Josephine is watching, shaking her head fondly. Later, at the ball, courtiers will whisper about her diamonds and his aura of authority. No one will guess that backstage, The general's confidence partly rests on socks without a wrinkle. A little humor creeps in here too. You picture Josephine confiding in a friend, "He spends longer with socks than with me," and the friend laughing, fanning herself in disbelief. Of course, it's exaggeration, but exaggeration rooted in truth. And you, half asleep in this story, chuckle softly at the thought of pillow talk derailed by a discussion of laundry. But beneath the comedy lies intimacy. She may tease, but she also knows his habits better than anyone. She recognizes that when he folds socks late into the night, it's not vanity. It's a shield against exhaustion, against fear, against the chaos that forever claws at him. She loves him despite, or maybe because of, these small absurdities. And so, you drift in the candlelight of their Paris home, the faint rustle of silk blending with the quiet sound of fabric being smoothed flat. A woman's laughter, a man's muttered protest, and a drawer of socks lined neatly as if Europe itself depended on it. You glide with him now into the polished corridors of the Tuileries Palace, where the chaos of battlefields feels far away and every corner smells faintly of wax, roses, and starch. Here, Napoleon has ascended from the boy folding socks in a dormitory trunk, and the general drying socks in a tent to the emperor who commands an entire household staff. You open a carved mahogany wardrobe, and your eyes widen, rows upon rows of garments, but most striking of all, the careful stacks of socks arranged with almost military precision. White silk for court appearances, sturdy wool for travel, and fine cotton for daily wear. Each pair lined heel to heel, toes pointing outward like soldiers on parade. You take a moment to imagine the inventory books. Valets and quartermasters kept meticulous lists, shirts counted, gloves tallied, stockings recorded by number and quality. A historical fact confirms this. Palace records show detailed wardrobe accounts, sometimes even noting how many pairs of silk stockings had been worn thin and needed replacement. A quirky tidbit slips in here too. Some of Napoleon's socks were ordered specially from Lyon, a city famous for silk weaving, and a few were embroidered discreetly with little designs to distinguish left from right. Though whether this was his idea or his tailor's remains uncertain. Historians still argue whether his obsession with such inventories reflected genuine need for control or whether it was just another facet of his endless appetite for order. You picture the valet's routine. Each morning, he presents socks like a jeweler showing gems. Napoleon, brisk and unsentimental, glances, chooses, and tucks them on with decisive movements. No hesitation, no frivolity. Yet, you sense satisfaction in the smooth fit, the unwrinkled line beneath polished boots. In the grand palace setting, this fuss over socks could seem ridiculous. But here, it feels symbolic. As the empire grows, as treaties are signed and armies march, even his socks must obey structure. Walk with him into a dressing chamber. Sunlight filters through heavy curtains, glinting off gilt mirrors. Shirts hang ready, waistcoats gleam, but again your eyes settle on the socks. They are arranged by fabric type, lightest to heaviest, so he can choose depending on duty. Imagine drawers sliding open with a soft sigh, revealing white gray and cream shades in exact order. To you, it looks almost like an artist's palette, each fabric a different tone of discipline. Servants whisper about it. Some roll their eyes. The emperor and his socks again. Others nod solemnly, recognizing that he demands order in everything, from cannon placement to hosiery. And you, trailing in thought, realize that his staff became part of this ritual, whether they liked it or not. A valet could face scolding if socks were mismatched, if folds were uneven, if drawers seemed disordered. The smallest slip in fabric could trigger his sharp voice. Still, Josephine's laughter sometimes echoes even here. She wanders into his chamber, sees the drawers open, and shakes her head with amusement. "You rule Europe, yet you count socks," she says lightly. He shrugs, perhaps muttering something about ruling Europe through socks. You chuckle softly at this image, the emperor trying to win an argument that yes, folding hosiery truly matters for statecraft. But beyond humor, there's something practical. Silk socks, for example, could rip easily. Cotton stretched, but wore thin. Wool, though durable, felt too rustic for palace life. He learns to balance fabrics as he balances alliances, switching pairs like treaties, each chosen for its purpose. It's almost too neat. Socks as metaphor for politics. One winter evening, you watch as the valet lays out a week's supply. Napoleon, tired but restless, inspects the lines, adjusts one stack slightly. It seems absurd. Does it matter if one pair sits half an inch off? To him, yes, because precision here feeds precision elsewhere. He believes habits ripple outward. If his socks are right, perhaps his campaigns will be right too. It's superstition disguised as discipline. Think for a moment of the contrast. Outside the palace, Paris bustles with vendors selling cheap stockings, patched and darned, worn by washerwomen and apprentices. Inside, Napoleon's socks gleam white against polished wood, never once seen with a hole. The gap between emperor and commoner couldn't be clearer. Yet in this soft fabric lies a strange bridge, because both, at the end of the day, want nothing more than dry, comfortable feet. You lean against the doorway, half smiling, half sleepy, watching him close the wardrobe. The click of the latch sounds final, like a seal placed on order itself. Beyond the palace walls, diplomacy tangles, rebellions simmer, wars prepare. But here, in this gilded closet, socks rest in silence, as if Europe itself waits in neat folded rows. You drift deeper into palace life, where the glow of chandeliers makes everything shimmer, and yet, somewhere behind the velvet and gold, weary staff sigh about socks. Imagine the tailors bent over tables, fingers cramped from endless stitching, and valets stooping by candlelight to fold and refold, all because their emperor will not tolerate a crease out of place. You hear them muttering under their breath, voices hushed so as not to carry through the grand halls. "He has conquered Austria," one grumbles. "But heaven forbid a sock should show a wrinkle." Another rolls his eyes. "Perhaps one day he will order us to iron the air itself." You smile at the absurdity, but the truth is clear. For the men who served him, socks were a never-ending labor. Napoleon wore through them quickly: marches, parades, ceremonies. Silk snagged on boots, cotton stretched, wool frayed at heels. Every day, the cycle repeated: washing, drying, mending, folding. One valet joked that he had darned enough holes to stitch a second empire from threads alone. The historical fact here is that Napoleon employed a large household staff whose duties were minutely divided: valets for clothing, chamberlains for ceremony, tailors for repair. Records describe the emperor's expectations of punctuality and precision. A quirky tidbit comes from a complaint written by one of his valets, who claimed Napoleon could dress faster than any tailor could prepare his garments, leaving staff scrambling like soldiers under fire. Historians still argue whether his demands were truly excessive or merely the product of his own relentless pace, which forced everyone around him to keep up or fall behind. Picture a typical morning. The valet enters, carrying socks neatly folded on a silver tray. Yes, silver, for even fabric must arrive in ceremony. Napoleon waves impatiently, snatches a pair, inspects the seams. If the stitches look weak, he snaps at the tailor. If the fold seems crooked, he scolds the valet. And yet, in the same breath, he may turn to discuss troop movements or the fate of kingdoms. Socks and sovereignty, side by side in the same moment. The staff develop coping mechanisms. Some fold socks twice as neatly as needed, knowing he will still adjust them himself. Others hide their grumbles in jokes after hours, sipping wine in the servants' quarters. If only the Austrians were socks, one sighs. He would have defeated them before breakfast. The laughter is weary, but genuine. A shared release after long days of fabric and fuss. You, half dozing in imagination, see the rhythm of their work. Soap suds rising in basins, the hiss of irons on linen, the snip of scissors trimming threads. Tailors argue softly about the best stitch for heels, while valets debate which drawer order will satisfy him most. To them, this is not trivial. It is survival. A displeased emperor can dismiss, punish, or shame. Better to fold again, polish harder, work later. Sometimes, though, he surprises them. One evening, noticing a valet's tired hands, he mutters a rare word of thanks. Another time, after a campaign, he praises the durability of a particular pair. Small crumbs of recognition, but enough to keep weary men loyal. You sense that in his mind, order in clothing reflects loyalty in service. He cannot allow slackness in one without fearing slackness in all. Of course, Josephine teases still. She once joked to a maid, he treats his valets like generals and his generals like valets. The maid laughed nervously, not daring to repeat it. But in private, you can imagine the staff nodding. For them, socks are battles fought daily, victories measured not in fields won, but in drawers closed without complaint. Humor lingers in the thought. Picture a tailor sharpening his needle like a sword, muttering, "For France," before mending yet another heel. Or a valet saluting a drawer of socks, whispering, "At attention, men." These little rituals keep them sane, just as folding keeps Napoleon steady. Yet beneath comedy lies exhaustion. The empire grows, ceremonies multiply, demands intensify. More socks, more washing, more folding. Staff whisper that the emperor himself could march longer on his obsession than any soldier on rations. And maybe they're right, because as you watch him inspect fabric again, smoothing it flat with almost tender fingers, you realize he draws strength from this. Socks are his anchor, and his staff, whether they laugh or complain, are the unseen soldiers of his private war for order. You let the scene fade. The candle-lit chamber, the muttering servants, the endless cycle of cloth and soap. Outside, empires shift, battles rage. Inside, socks rule quietly, demanding endless labor and quiet obedience. You trail behind him now as the palace doors swing open and the world of the military spills in. Horses clatter on cobblestones, aides scurry with dispatches, maps unfurl across polished tables. Yet even here, where cannons and cavalry dominate conversation, socks sneak their way into strategy. You notice it first in the corner. A leather chest, plain on the outside but lined with compartments inside, each holding pairs of socks wrapped tight, ready for campaign life. He does not leave Paris without them, for even an emperor knows cold, wet feet can topple morale faster than enemy artillery. The historical fact is undeniable. Napoleon's armies marched across Europe with logistical systems that rivaled their firepower. Wagons carried uniforms, boots, food, and yes, textiles like stockings. Inventories listed hundreds of pairs for officers and thousands for troops. A quirky tidbit adds color here. Some soldiers claimed they could tell where the emperor had been because they'd find discarded socks of finer quality than their own, left behind in haste. Historians still argue whether Napoleon himself personally fussed over these campaign socks, or whether his valets managed it entirely while he merely enjoyed the results. You step into a campaign tent pitched in a muddy field. Outside, drums beat, rain falls, soldiers grumble. Inside, the emperor sits at a folding desk, pen scratching across orders. In one corner, socks hang from a line, steam rising as they dry near a brazier. Imagine him glancing up from dictating battle plans to say, almost absent-mindedly, "Are they dry yet?" His valet nods nervously, flipping the fabric to ensure no dampness lingers. You smirk. It is absurd to think the fate of empires paused for socks, yet in that moment, it does. The soldiers, meanwhile, carry their own rituals. Many march barefoot at times. Boots slung over shoulders to preserve them, but they guard socks fiercely. A good pair can mean the difference between frostbite and survival. They mend them with crude stitches, sometimes trading bread for thread. You wander through the campfires at night, listening to men joke, "If only we had the emperor's socks, we'd conquer winter itself." Laughter follows, but it is laced with envy. Napoleon, ever practical, learns from them too. Before certain campaigns, he insists on thicker woolens, ordering crates sent ahead. He knows that an army moves on its feet, and feet wrapped in decent fabric move farther. Yet he cannot resist the same orderliness he demands at home. Each evening, socks are collected, brushed, aired, folded again. Valets mutter under their breath, but they comply, knowing a crease might earn a frown sharper than cannon fire. You lean closer, noticing how he blends the mundane with the monumental. He plots flanking maneuvers while rolling socks into neat bundles. He dictates supply lines while pulling on a dry pair. To him, no line exists between small comforts and grand victories. They are all part of the same campaign. And you realize, in a quiet way, that socks are strategy disguised as softness. There is humor, too. One aide remembers how Napoleon once barked, "Why are we delayed?" only to discover the culprit was his valet, desperately hunting for a matching pair. The emperor exploded in frustration, declaring, "I conquer nations faster than you match socks." You picture the poor valet sweating, socks in hand, and you can't help but chuckle softly. But underneath the comedy, the importance remains. March through Italy, cross into Austria, slog through Poland. All of it leaves men wet, cold, blistered. Napoleon understands morale is fragile, and a dry pair of socks can feel like a small miracle. He shares this practicality with his troops, at least symbolically. Soldiers say they sometimes saw him adjusting his boots, tugging at socks as ordinary as theirs, and it gave them a strange comfort. Their emperor suffered feet just as they did. You let the scene stretch in your imagination. The endless lines of men, boots pounding the ground, frost clinging to breath, and somewhere, tucked inside boots, socks absorbing the strain. Napoleon rides at the head, cloak billowing, but beneath his grandeur lie the same threads, ordinary fabric holding extraordinary burdens. The campaign tent grows quiet. Maps roll up, candles sputter. The emperor finally lays down to rest. His socks, folded neatly by his bedroll, wait for morning. You sigh, sinking deeper into the rhythm of this strange routine. Outside, war rages. Inside, two soft bundles guard his feet from the cold. You follow him out of the tent now, but instead of marching with troops, you drift toward the lighter side of his world. Fashion, elegance, and appearances that mattered almost as much as cannons. The empire isn't only built on battles, it's also stitched together by symbols, and Napoleon understands that even socks can whisper messages of power. In salons glittering with chandeliers, courtiers judge not only words and titles, but fabrics and seams. You watch him stride in, boots polished, breeches sharp, and underneath, though no one sees it, socks carefully chosen to match the moment. A historical fact anchors this. Court dress under Napoleon had strict codes, with uniforms, embroidery, and even accessories regulated to reflect hierarchy. Socks, though less visible, still played a role, especially in formal assemblies where every detail had to be flawless. A quirky tidbit surfaces in gossip. Some claimed Napoleon favored plain socks, while his marshals indulged in flashy embroidered ones, as though their ankles were campaigning for attention. Historians still argue whether his restrained taste was genuine modesty or a deliberate contrast meant to highlight his authority over more flamboyant courtiers. You picture him preparing for a grand reception at the Tuileries. The valet lays out two pairs, silk, pristine white, shining faintly in the candlelight. Josephine enters, teasing, "You cannot possibly need both for one evening." He shrugs, muttering about spares, but you suspect it's less about need and more about ritual. For him, doubling socks before a gala feels like doubling confidence. You smile. It's not unlike modern people who pack 3 chargers for one trip, just in case. Fashion matters here because image shapes politics. Ambassadors scrutinize every detail, the tilt of his hat, the cut of his coat, the gleam of his boots. Socks may stay hidden, but Napoleon knows that comfort below the surface affects composure above it. A wrinkle in fabric could shift his stride, and a shift in stride could alter how power is perceived. You imagine him thinking, why risk diplomacy for the sake of a seam? The court notices too. Whispering attendants sometimes compare the emperor's simple stockings with the jeweled slippers of other rulers. See how he avoids extravagance, they murmur, yet still commands respect. The irony is delicious. While kings flaunt gold-threaded hosiery, Napoleon wields plain silk as a badge of control. To him, simplicity is elegance, and elegance is authority. Of course, there are moments of levity. One courtier recalls how, during a hurried change between ceremonies, Napoleon put on mismatched socks, one silk, one cotton, and only realized halfway through the reception. Instead of fury, he laughed, whispering to Josephine, "Perhaps balance in fabric brings balance in empire." You chuckle quietly at the thought, the emperor making philosophy from a laundry error. Beyond palace walls, fashion shifts too. Ordinary Parisians admire and imitate imperial styles, though their stockings are rougher, patched with whatever thread is available. Still, they copy the length, the cut, the way breeches reveal just a hint of fabric at the calf. To them, socks become a democratic dream, a sliver of empire they can wear, even if the fabric frays. Napoleon seems aware of this cultural echo. His choices ripple outward, shaping not only politics, but closets across France. When he insists on clean, neat socks, he is, in a sense, teaching an empire that order begins at the ankle. A small gesture, yes, but you can't help thinking how often civilizations hinge on the smallest details. You wander into a ballroom scene. Music swells, couples glide across polished floors. Beneath the swish of gowns and the clatter of boots, hundreds of socks rub silently against silk shoes and leather soles. They are invisible, but essential, just like the quiet discipline Napoleon cultivates. No one applauds socks at the end of a dance, yet without them, blisters would halt the music. The irony of fashion is that it demands visibility while socks hide. And yet, their secrecy makes them powerful. Napoleon's plain white pairs, tucked away, become a private rebellion against the glittering chaos around him. You sense he enjoys that contrast, his empire loud, his ankles silent. As the evening fades, candles gutter and dancers disperse. The emperor retreats, boots off, socks folded carefully by his valet. The gala may be over, but his order remains intact. You breathe out slowly, sinking with him into the hush. Fashion sparkled for a few hours, but socks, quiet, obedient, enduring, remain long after the lights dim. You move with him now onto the long and punishing roads of campaign. The carriages bump and sway, the horses snort clouds of steam in cold dawn air, and the soldiers tramp through mud that sucks at their boots. Somewhere behind the clatter of muskets and the rattle of wagon wheels, a quieter story unfolds, the endless march of socks. If battles are won by strategy, campaigns are endured by fabric, thread, and the resilience of feet wrapped against the earth. A historical fact marks this scene clearly. Napoleon's troops sometimes marched over 20 miles a day, through rain, snow, or blistering sun. Their boots often wore out faster than replacements could be supplied, making socks one of the few barriers against frostbite, blisters, and infection. A quirky tidbit whispers from soldiers' letters. Some men stuffed straw into worn socks for insulation, or even wrapped rags in place of lost pairs, cursing supply officers while limping toward the next bivouac. Historians still argue whether the emperor's vaunted logistical genius truly extended to the common soldier's comfort, or if his obsession with order was reserved mainly for his personal wardrobe and the officers near him. You picture a long column winding through the fields of Central Europe, muskets over shoulders, packs heavy, men's feet pounding against frozen soil. The emperor rides ahead, boots shining, but you drift closer to the infantry. One soldier peels off his boot at night to reveal socks stiff with mud, toes poking out like prisoners demanding freedom. He chuckles grimly. The emperor may keep silk, but I keep holes. Around the campfire, others nod, comparing rips, swapping scraps of thread, even trading pairs like coins. Napoleon, however, notices more than they realize. In his tent, he quizzes officers about the state of uniforms, footwear, and yes, socks. He knows morale erodes when men march in misery. He pushes quartermasters, demands new shipments, scolds generals who neglect supplies. Yet even his energy cannot stop reality. Winter devours fabric faster than wagons can deliver it. Still, he insists. An army marches on its feet, he reminds them, as if saying it loudly enough could knit holes closed. You lean closer to a scene in the Polish countryside, snow-deep, breath like smoke. Soldiers trudge, wrapping cloth around bleeding feet. In his tent, Napoleon removes his own boots, examines socks worn but still intact. His valet, anxious, offers a fresh pair, warmed near a brazier. He pulls them on with a sigh, muttering about frost and fate. You wonder if he ever thinks of the rankers shivering outside, their socks little more than frozen rags. Perhaps he does, perhaps not. Historians still argue whether compassion touched him deeply or whether efficiency drowned softer thoughts. Humor creeps in, even here. Imagine a soldier joking, "If only His Majesty would decree socks never wear out, we'd win every war." Laughter breaks the misery, though it's bitter laughter, like bread gone stale. Another mutters, "Maybe the Austrians have warmer pairs, we should just borrow theirs." You can almost hear the chuckles, tired but stubborn, echoing against frozen wagons. At night, you see campfires glowing in endless rows. Men hang socks on sticks, praying they'll dry before morning. The smell is unmistakable. Damp wool, smoke, sweat. Some pairs stiffen in the frost, standing upright like little ghosts beside the embers. It is absurd and sad, and yet somehow comforting. These tiny rituals of fabric help them endure another march, another day of cold earth and heavy packs. Napoleon himself joins in the ritual, though with more luxury. His valets wash, dry, fold, present. Still, he too relies on these threads. When he rises before dawn, slides warm socks onto tired feet, he regains a sense of control before facing maps and maneuvers. For him, order in fabric becomes order in mind, and order in mind becomes victory on fields. The march continues, day after day. Mud, frost, dust, rain. You watch the endless choreography of boots and socks, fabric stretching, tearing, being patched again and again. The emperor pushes forward, armies follow, and beneath it all, socks absorb the strain silently. You realize in this moment that the empire is not only carried by cannons or cavalry, it is carried, quite literally, by millions of weary feet wrapped in fragile fabric. As the column halts for the night, you hear silence descend. Fires flicker, snores rise, and somewhere, Napoleon's valet folds one more pair, smoothing fabric with care. The emperor dreams of battles, perhaps, but his feet rest in softness. And you, drowsy with the rhythm, let yourself drift into that same quiet, where socks and soldiers alike surrender, if only for a few hours, to sleep. You wander with him now into the grand salons and smoky drawing rooms of Paris, where diplomacy takes the shape of whispered bargains, subtle gestures, and carefully chosen fabrics. Here, the emperor's socks, though hidden from sight, still play their peculiar role in the theater of politics. You imagine him seated in a gilded chair, boots polished to a mirror shine, his posture as stiff as his uniform. Beneath the leather, though, lies soft silk, an invisible comfort while he negotiates treaties and intimidates ambassadors. To you, it feels almost comical. Europe's future dangling on threads, woven in Lyon or Paris. A historical fact steadies this vision. During his reign, Napoleon used court ceremony and fashion as tools of diplomacy, projecting power not just through words, but through controlled appearances. Every layer of his attire was deliberate, intended to communicate authority. A quirky tidbit adds flavor. In certain councils, he reportedly removed his boots for comfort, revealing pristine white socks, an oddly vulnerable moment that startled courtiers used to his iron facade. Historians still argue whether this was carelessness, eccentricity, or a calculated move to unsettle others by reminding them that the man who ruled Europe was also, simply, a man with feet. Picture a late evening at the Tuileries. Ambassadors from Austria and Prussia lean forward, their eyes searching his expression. He leans back slightly, boot tapping softly on the carpet. That sound, the faint muffled rhythm of sock against sole, becomes its own kind of punctuation. When he pauses mid-sentence, the room stills, every diplomat waiting for his next phrase. Yet you, observing quietly, can't help but notice that under all the grandeur, the smallest detail, the stretch of silk over his heel, carries its own strange weight. His valets, of course, prepare for these occasions with military rigor. Socks must be spotless, seams aligned, fabric without the faintest flaw. One valet once joked to another, "We fold his diplomacy one pair at a time." They laugh softly, though they know it is true. The emperor demands not only polished boots, but perfect foundations beneath them. If his feet feel wrong, his temper flares, and no ambassador wishes to face Napoleon irritated by socks. Sometimes, though, the smallest slip cracks the mask. One evening, as Josephine hosts a reception, Napoleon sits with ministers when a thread loosens near his ankle. He feels it, shifts uncomfortably, frowns. The ministers notice the change in mood, but not the cause. You smile at the absurdity, an empire's atmosphere altered by one rebellious thread. And yet, is it so absurd? Haven't you too lost patience from the itch of a sock seam? Imagine multiplying that by the weight of ruling half of Europe. There's humor here. One diplomat allegedly wrote in a private letter, "His Majesty's socks appear to march in better order than his allies." You can hear the chuckle between the lines, a sly jab at the emperor's endless need for control. Another joked, "Perhaps if we mismatched them, his empire would fall." These quips traveled in whispers, small rebellions against overwhelming authority, but beneath the jokes lies a curious truth. Napoleon understood that confidence, like fabric, begins close to the skin. Socks, soft and secure, gave him one less distraction, one more piece of order to stand upon. You watch him during a tense negotiation, his voice sharp, his gestures precise, his boots planted firmly. Yet beneath them, the invisible order of his socks steadies him. No one sees, but he knows, and that is enough. You drift into another chamber, quieter now, where he meets secretly with advisors. Maps spread across tables, candlelight flickering, voices low. Again, his boots tap softly, socks muffling the sound. The empire is dissected here, borders redrawn, alliances weighed, and still those threads wrap his feet, grounding him as surely as any soldier on guard outside. You realize how even the invisible can shape history, how a pair of socks can become an anchor during storms of politics. Historians still argue whether these rituals were conscious tools of statecraft or simply habits born of his restless nature. Was he aware of the symbolism, or did he simply cling to comfort while others projected meaning onto it? The debate lingers, like a whisper in these old salons. The night grows late. Ambassadors bow and depart, their cloaks swirling. The emperor retreats to his chamber, boots heavy in his valet's hands. Once again, socks are folded, set aside, ready for washing and mending. Another pair waits for morning, ready to step into diplomacy anew. You, half lulled by the rhythm, notice how the fabric of empire and the fabric of socks weave together. Threads cross threads, Treaties cross treaties, and in the quiet spaces between, a man simply pulls on silk and prepares to rule. You drift with him now into the bustling world of factories, weaving rooms, and small workshops, where the hum of looms and the hiss of dye kettles make a background music far removed from palaces or battlefields. The socks that end up in Napoleon's drawers, carefully folded and guarded by anxious valets, do not spring into existence by magic. They are born here, in the hands of spinners, weavers, and dyers who live lives the emperor rarely sees. You follow the threads backward, tracing silk to lion, wool to the hills, cotton from colonial trade, all converging into fabric that will swaddle imperial feet. A historical fact anchors the scene. During Napoleon's reign, Lyon remained one of Europe's major centers of textile production, famed for its silks. Imperial patronage boosted local industries, with factories supplying uniforms, stockings, and ceremonial fabrics. A quirky tidbit comes from records noting that some sock makers would weave initials or small patterns inside the fabric, invisible to the eye when worn, like secret graffiti against imperial ankles. Historians still argue whether Napoleon personally commissioned such details, or whether they were quiet acts of artisan pride. Picture the workshop in Lyon. Women sit at spinning wheels, men operate looms, children dart with bobbins in hand. The air smells of oil, wool grease, and hot metal. Fingers move so quickly they blur, knotting, threading, folding. For them, socks are not symbols of empire. They are wages, survival, the difference between bread or hunger. And yet, their stitches travel far, carrying tiny echoes of their lives into the emperor's wardrobe. Imagine one girl, 12 years old, tying knots with red raw fingers. She giggles to a friend. Perhaps he will wear these to a battle. Her friend rolls her eyes. Or perhaps he will never notice them at all. The irony is sharp. For her, the sock is toil. For him, it is ritual. Still, the threads connect them, invisible but real. Meanwhile, in the countryside, shepherds shear sheep, their laughter mixing with the bleating. Wool bales travel by cart, bouncing along rutted roads until they reach city mills. Cotton arrives by ship, a reminder of colonial entanglements, distant fields where other hands labor unseen. The empire's socks carry more stories than one man could ever count. Napoleon, of course, thinks of supply more than sentiment. He issues decrees to support French industry, urging self-sufficiency and quality. He wants uniforms that last, fabrics that reflect the glory of France, but he rarely glimpses the strain on the workers who provide it. You, wandering these workshops, hear their tired sighs, the rasp of fabric, the coughs from dust-filled lungs. To them, the emperor is a distant figure whose feet touch fabric their hands once pulled taut. There's humor even here. A weaver mutters, "If he steps into mud, he owes me new boots, too." Another jokes, "Perhaps one day he'll command us to weave socks big enough to cover Europe." They laugh, weary but defiant. Their jokes a way to stitch humanity into endless labor. In Paris shops, finished socks line shelves, displayed alongside gloves and handkerchiefs. Shoppers admire them, though most can only afford coarse cotton, while the emperor claims silk. A clerk whispers proudly, "His Majesty's valets bought from us last week," as if proximity to imperial ankles elevates the whole store. You smile at the vanity of it all. how even merchants bask in reflected glory through fabric. Yet scholars debate this too. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's push for French industry truly uplifted workers, or merely pressed them harder under the weight of war. Did socks become a symbol of national pride, or just another thread in the empire's exploitation? The question lingers like lint caught in cloth. As the day closes in Lyon, looms fall silent, workers trudge home. They leave behind stacks of fabric that will soon be cut, sewn, folded. Somewhere down the chain, valets will smooth those very socks, and Napoleon will tug them on without ever knowing the names of those who spun and stitched. And yet, you sense that in the quiet of night, the threads remember. You drift out of the workshop, back toward the glow of palaces, but the clatter of looms echoes still in your ears. The empire may shine in marble and gold, but beneath it lies fabric woven by tired hands. Socks, plain and humble, carry both worlds, the splendor of emperors and the sweat of workers. You wander with him now into the quieter spaces of his private quarters, where public grandeur gives way to routines no one outside the inner circle ever sees. The empire may roar with battles and proclamations, but in these hushed chambers, the emperor's day begins and ends with rituals of fabric. Here, socks are not just laundry, they are ceremony, as precise as any coronation. You ease into the rhythm, almost hypnotic, of folding, stacking, and aligning, as though time itself obeyed the order of threads. A historical fact steadies your view. Napoleon's daily routine was famously rigid. He rose early, worked long hours, and expected everything in his personal environment to follow a strict pattern. Valets recorded their duties in almost military fashion, from laying out clothing to ensuring exact placement of items. A quirky tidbit slips in. It said Napoleon sometimes demanded socks be warmed before being put on, not for luxury, but because he despised the shock of cold fabric against skin. Historians still argue whether this detail reveals pampered eccentricity or simple efficiency, since warm fabric stretches easier and wastes less time. Picture a morning. The valet enters silently, tray in hand, presenting 3 pairs: silk for meetings, cotton for walking, wool for sudden chill. They are arranged heel to heel, toes aligned, each crease pressed flat. Napoleon glances quickly, chooses without hesitation, and within seconds the chosen pair disappears into boots, polished bright. He does not thank, he does not linger, he expects perfection as naturally as breath. You imagine the valet's heart racing nonetheless, praying he selected the correct drawer, the correct fabric, the correct fold. At night, the ritual reverses. Boots off, socks peeled away, checked for wear, set aside for washing. Another valet folds them, smoothing seams, whispering small curses at stubborn wrinkles. In the background, Josephine sometimes laughs softly, amused by the solemnity lavished on hosiery. You rule nations, she teases, but you scold creases. He replies without looking up. Order is order. You can almost hear the stubborn pride in his tone. The drawers themselves become small monuments. Open one, and you see neat stacks like regiments on parade. Whites in one row, creams in another, woolens stacked by thickness. To Napoleon, this is not indulgence, it is preparation. Disorder here feels like weakness, and weakness cannot be allowed. Even in the privacy of his chamber, socks must obey. Servants joke quietly about it in the corridors. He spends more time inspecting seams than treaties, one mutters. Another replies, "At least socks do not argue back." Their laughter fades quickly when footsteps approach, for no one wishes to be caught mocking the emperor's fabric. Still, the humor keeps them sane, a small rebellion hidden behind starched collars and polished trays. Imagine him traveling, carriages packed not just with maps and correspondence, but with carefully prepared bundles of socks, each rolled, tied, labeled. His staff knows the routine: one bundle per day, extras for emergencies, all folded identically. Even in the chaos of campaign, these bundles anchor him, a thread of normality amid mud and smoke. You wonder if, in his mind, socks become a talisman, proof that order can survive even war. There's a faint absurdity here. A man who reshapes Europe, who crowns himself emperor in Notre Dame, still frets if fabric folds unevenly. And yet, isn't that the paradox of humanity? The greatest deeds often stand on the smallest comforts. You chuckle quietly, imagining him pausing mid-dictation of strategy to adjust a sock seam that dared to twist. But debates linger. Historians still argue whether this obsessive routine reflected genius discipline or creeping compulsion. Was he modeling order for his empire, or merely soothing his own restless mind? The line is fine, blurred like threads worn thin from use. You glance once more at the chamber. The fire glows low, shadows flicker across the wardrobe. The valet folds the last pair, sets it precisely on top of the stack. Silence settles like a blanket. For tonight, at least, order is restored. Napoleon sinks into sleep, guarded not just by sentries at the gates, but by socks folded into quiet perfection. You trail along behind him now as carriages rumble, horses stamp, and campaigns stretch across muddy fields and frozen plains. Socks, those small, soft pieces of cloth, seem absurdly fragile against the roar of cannon fire and the tramp of soldiers. Yet here, in the long marches of the Napoleonic Wars, socks become as critical as muskets. You notice quickly how much a man's morale depends not only on strategy, but on the state of his feet. A blister, a tear, a soaked sole can grind armies down faster than bullets. A historical fact slips in neatly. During the infamous Russian campaign of 1812, inadequate clothing, including socks and boots, contributed terribly to frostbite and death. Napoleon's army marched into the snow with supplies already stretched thin, and by the time winter set in, soldiers wrapped rags around their feet when proper stockings ran out. A quirky tidbit appears in memoirs. Some veterans swore they had once seen officers trade silk socks for bread, treating hosiery like currency when rations dwindled. Historians still argue whether Napoleon underestimated the supply challenges of outfitting hundreds of thousands with sufficient footwear, or whether the breakdown came from corrupt contractors pocketing profits. Picture the scene. A line of soldiers trudges through endless mud, their socks soaked, heels rubbed raw. The air smells of wet wool, horse sweat, and smoke. Boots squelch with every step. You watch one man pause, tear a strip from his shirt, and wrap it around his foot, muttering curses in 3 different dialects. Another soldier, luckier, pulls out a pair his mother had knitted, the yarn uneven but warm. He smiles faintly, as if her hands still guarded him. Meanwhile, Napoleon rides ahead, his own socks warm, folded from lion silks and Paris cottons. Yet he is not blind to the suffering behind him. Reports flood in of frostbite, bleeding heels, men unable to march. He grows frustrated, barking orders for resupply, for repairs, for requisitions. But logistics in wartime move slower than carriages over frozen rivers. Socks unravel, supplies vanish, soldiers stumble on. You drift into a tent at night. The air is thick with the smell of damp fabric drying by smoky fires. Men peel off boots, groaning at swollen feet, socks steaming faintly as heat hits wool. They joke, because soldiers always joke. One mutters, "If the emperor really loves order, he can start by folding me new socks." Another quips, "Perhaps tomorrow we fight barefoot, less laundry to carry." Their laughter is weary but defiant, a thread of humanity holding them together. Napoleon himself sits nearby, poring over maps, candlelight flickering across his stern face. His boots stand beside him, and yes, a valet kneels in the corner, carefully setting aside the day's socks, readying another pair for dawn. Even in campaign, the ritual holds. His feet must never be unguarded. He knows, perhaps more keenly than he admits, that an emperor limps no less painfully than a soldier. The campaign pushes on. Rivers freeze, villages burn, nights stretch long. The men wrap their feet in whatever they can find, cloth, straw, even pages torn from discarded books. A strange image, words meant to inspire turned into makeshift socks. You almost laugh, though it's a hollow sound. And still, you recall how historians debate endlessly. Did Napoleon truly fail his army with poor preparation, or was winter itself the unbeatable enemy? The truth, like fabric stretched too thin, threatens to tear under scrutiny. And yet, socks become symbols of survival. A pair unbroken through weeks of marching feels like treasure. Officers barter, soldiers guard their bundles fiercely, mothers back home knit faster, prayers woven into every stitch. One soldier whispers as he pulls on his last clean pair, "These will take me home." You can feel the fragile hope trembling in his voice. There's a comic edge even in tragedy. Imagine men fighting over socks like gamblers over cards. Someone shouts, "I'll trade you half a sausage for wool, no holes." Another answers, "Only if they match." The absurdity reminds you that even in misery, humor clings like lint. Napoleon watches the army thin, each loss carving deeper into him. He knows the empire wobbles when soldiers falter. Perhaps, in his quiet moments, he remembers the folded stacks at home, the perfection of silk-lined drawers, and wonders how order dissolves so quickly into chaos once boots hit mud. Socks, humble, easily forgotten, have become the empire's silent battleground. You step away from the frost-bitten march for a moment, hearing only the rustle of wool and the shuffle of tired feet. It's a sound less dramatic than cannon fire, yet it echoes louder in memory. The emperor's destiny, the soldiers' lives, all tangled in threads, stretched across Europe's fields. Socks, fragile and unglamorous, hold together an army one blister at a time. You find yourself drifting now from the mud of campaigns into the polished interiors of French workshops, salons, and bustling streets where merchants turn socks into business. The empire is not just fought on fields, but also spun on looms and sold across counters, each transaction threading into Napoleon's vision of economic control. Here, socks shift from private ritual to public commerce, woven into the fabric of trade, tariffs, and taxes. A historical fact steadies the story. Napoleon's continental system, declared in 1806, was an economic blockade designed to weaken Britain by cutting off its goods from continental Europe. This affected everything from sugar to textiles, forcing French industries to produce substitutes and ramp up output. A quirky tidbit slips in from period anecdotes. Smuggling became so rampant that socks were sometimes stuffed into barrels labeled as cheese or books, sneaked across borders in absurd disguises. Historians still argue whether the continental system truly boosted French textile industries or crippled them with shortages, as British cotton imports vanished and local producers scrambled to keep up. Imagine the streets of Paris, shop windows gleam with fabrics, rows of gloves, and neat stacks of socks tied in ribbons. Merchants lean out of doorways, calling to passers-by, praising their wares. Silk stockings, fit for an emperor, one boasts. Another, less grand, mutters, woolen socks, warm enough for Russia if you're mad enough to go. You wander past, hearing laughter from shoppers who recognize the joke too well. For wealthy Parisians, socks become status symbols. A lady flutters her fan while selecting silk stockings dyed in fashionable colors, declaring them essential for soirees. A young officer, fresh from cadet school, buys sturdy cotton pairs, pretending not to notice the fine ones beyond his purse. To buy socks here is to declare who you are, and perhaps who you aspire to be. Meanwhile, underground markets bloom. Smugglers slip through borders with British textiles hidden in false-bottom carts. In taverns, whispers pass, English stockings, finest weave, cheaper than the emperor's taxes. You smile at the thought of contraband socks becoming treasure, as if a pair of British silk could topple decrees. The irony is sharp. While Napoleon fights Britain with cannons, common folk wage their quiet rebellion with contraband hosiery. Factories, too, hum with urgency. In Lyon and Rouen, machines clatter day and night, churning out stockings in silk, cotton, and wool. Owners boast of supporting the emperor's cause, though privately they grumble about shortages of raw material. Workers, exhausted, stitch and spin, often earning too little to afford the very socks they produce. A young weaver sighs, "I make them, yet my toes still freeze." His words hang heavy in the humid air, and yet humor persists. An apprentice jokes, "Perhaps if we stitched Napoleon's face into the socks, they'd last longer." Another replies, "Or they'd collapse after one speech." The laughter ripples across the workshop, small rebellion hidden in fabric dust. Napoleon himself understands the stakes. He inspects factories, writes decrees, demands reports. He wants France to be self-reliant, to prove Europe can live without Britain's cotton. When presented with samples of stockings, he pinches the fabric, tests the stretch, nods briskly. To him, these socks are more than garments. They are evidence of victory in economic war. Yet you wonder if he ever feels the gap between silk in his hand and wool on the workers' blistered feet. Markets adapt in creative ways. Dyes shift to local sources. Colors trend toward what can be made cheaply. Some merchants advertise patriotic hosiery, woven for France alone. Housewives darn endlessly, patching and repatching old pairs to stretch their lifespan. Children, too, join the trade, carrying bundles through streets, shouting, "Socks, warm socks." Their voices echo like a chorus, a soundtrack to empire's commerce. Debates unfold across Europe. Historians still argue whether Napoleon's system truly reshaped consumer habits or merely sparked more inventive smuggling. Did French industries grow stronger under pressure, or did shortages erode public faith in his vision? The truth is tangled, like mismatched socks in a drawer, never fully paired. Picture a dinner table conversation. A merchant brags that his hosiery sales have doubled since English imports vanished. His brother scoffs, yes, doubled in price, halved in quality. Across the table, their mother sighs, children, eat your bread. Socks will not feed you. The family laughs, knowing she has the last word. And yet, the trade continues, relentless. Socks move from looms to shops, from smugglers' carts to officers' trunks, from bustling Paris to frozen fronts. Every pair carries not just thread, but policy, resistance, and pride. For Napoleon, they are tokens of economic war. For merchants, coins in the till. For common folk, warmth against winter. You step back, watching the marketplace swirl, hearing coins clink, fabrics rustle, merchants haggle. Socks lie folded, waiting to be chosen, their silent destiny woven into lives both humble and imperial. In their quiet way, they march too, alongside soldiers, alongside smugglers, alongside the emperor himself. You drift now into the twilight years of the empire, when the golden threads of order begin to fray, and even socks, those humble guardians of Napoleon's ankles, start telling stories of decline. The grandeur of coronations and the thunder of cannons fade into long evenings of paperwork, endless correspondence, and the creeping sense that time is unraveling stitches faster than they can be mended. You walk softly through corridors where drawers are still stacked neatly, yet the world outside grows messier by the hour. A historical fact anchors the moment. By 1814, Napoleon faced the combined pressure of coalition forces, his empire shrinking as quickly as it had once expanded. Exile loomed, and resources, both human and material, ran thin. A quirky tidbit floats through memoirs of the period. Valets noted that Napoleon's socks began to wear out faster, not because of poorer fabric, but because he paced restlessly, wearing through soles with his constant motion. Historians still argue whether these tiny observations of fabric fatigue reflect larger truths about an emperor unraveling. Was it the empire falling apart, or simply a man walking holes into cloth while plotting his next move? In Paris, whispers fill salons. Merchants grumble about shortages. Soldiers complain of threadbare uniforms, and even courtiers notice that the emperor no longer replaces his socks with quite the same urgency. Perhaps budgets tightened. Perhaps he simply had less energy to scold over creases. But you sense the shift, the small signals of wear in an empire that once obsessed over precision. Picture him in the Tuileries, late at night, pacing across polished floors. His boots lie discarded, socks muffle his steps. He moves back and forth, muttering strategies, tracing maps with his fingers in the air. A valet watches nervously, noting each worn patch underfoot, wondering how to tell the emperor that his pacing devours fabric faster than supply can replace. The valet sighs, if only wars could be won with darning needles. You chuckle softly, imagining a general armed not with cannons but spools of thread. Outside, the people feel the unraveling too. Women darn socks until patches overlap like quilt squares. Soldiers on leave carry pairs so worn they resemble nets more than garments. Smugglers still ply their trade, but even contraband loses luster as defeat creeps closer. One soldier jokes, "My socks have more holes than France has allies." His friend replies, "Then they match the map." They laugh bitterly, but laughter is a shield against despair. Napoleon himself still clings to routine. Drawers remain folded, bundles tied. Even in the face of disaster, he insists on order, as if neat socks could hold chaos at bay. There's a certain defiance in it, a refusal to surrender to disorder. And yet, the seams strain. One valet recalls being scolded for a misplaced pair even as cannon fire echoed outside the city. You almost admire the stubbornness, absurd though it is, like arranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. Then comes exile to Elba in 1814. The island is smaller than Paris salons, yet even there, Napoleon brings his rituals. He carries trunks filled with clothing, including carefully packed socks. The locals gossip. The emperor folds socks more neatly than we fold sheets. You imagine him on quiet evenings, drawers lined with precision, finding comfort in fabric when thrones and titles slip away. Socks become his tiny kingdom, each pair a citizen under strict rule. A comic moment sneaks in. Servants on Elba reportedly teased each other about who had the honor of tending to His Majesty's hosiery. One joked, "Better to guard socks than guard borders." Another replied, "At least socks do not betray." The laughter rippled through stone halls, softening the sharpness of exile. Historians still argue whether these domestic routines reflect Napoleon's resilience or his denial. Was folding socks a way of clinging to control, or was it genuine comfort in small order when great order was gone? The debate lingers like a frayed thread at the edge of history. Picture the evenings there. Waves crash against rocky shores. Crickets sing in the fields, and inside, candles flicker across stacks of folded fabric. Napoleon sits at a desk, pen scratching across paper, while in the next room, a valet smooths creases into cotton. The empire outside may be lost, but within these walls, socks remain obedient, folded, aligned, loyal. You smile faintly at the irony. Cloth endures where crowns do not. And yet threads fray further. Waterloo looms, and with it the final unraveling. Soldiers march once more, boots heavy, socks patched beyond recognition. A young officer mutters, "If our feet fail, our fight fails." Another replies, "Then let us march barefoot." Their humor masks dread, but their words hold truth. Without fabric, without small comforts, even empires stumble. Napoleon returns from exile briefly, fiery as ever, but his routines cannot save him this time. When defeat finally comes, the image that lingers is not of coronation robes or glittering crowns, but of worn socks folded quietly in drawers, symbols of a man who demanded order even as the world disobeyed. You step back, watching the empire fade like fabric washed too many times. Colors dull, threads thin, seams stretch. And in the quiet, the socks remain, silent witnesses to glory and ruin, folded neatly until the very end. You drift onward now, following the emperor not into battlefields or gilded salons, but into the quieter flow of household economy, laundries, linens, and the endless cycle of washing, drying, folding, and mending. Behind every neat drawer of socks lies an invisible army of washerwomen servants and valets who keep fabric alive. Without them, even an emperor's feet would sink into filth. You step softly into this world, where steaming tubs bubble, soap stings fingers, and fabric beats against washboards in a rhythm older than any empire. A historical fact anchors the scene. In early 19th century France, laundry was often sent to riversides or communal washhouses, where washerwomen scrubbed tirelessly, their labor so intense it became a recognized profession. Napoleon's household had staff dedicated solely to linens, including socks, who followed him even on campaigns. A quirky tidbit emerges from memoirs. Some valets claimed Napoleon disliked the smell of strong soap, insisting his socks be rinsed multiple times until all traces faded. Historians still argue whether this detail reflects genuine sensitivity or mere fussiness magnified by the gossip of servants. Imagine the laundry courtyard of the Tuileries. Steam rises in winter air, carrying scents of soap and wet wool. Women chatter as they scrub, arms plunging into icy water, knuckles red. They complain about the endless piles, shirts, sheets, stockings, and roll their eyes when a valet appears with another basket marked Imperial. Does he think we have 4 extra hands? One mutters. Another replies, he has 4 armies, so perhaps yes. Their laughter echoes, rough but spirited, mixing with the slap of wet fabric. Inside the palace, socks travel a cycle almost ceremonial. Morning, worn briefly. Evening, removed, examined, and set aside. Next day, sent to wash, dried on lines, checked for holes, returned, folded, stored. The rhythm is precise, like a dance rehearsed endlessly. You sense how even this small circle mirrors the empire. Inputs, outputs, inspections, order restored. And yet, the human labor behind it remains invisible, a whisper beneath marble floors. At times, humor sneaks through the drudgery. A washerwoman sighs, if these socks touched so many battlefields, perhaps they'd smell like victory, not sweat. Another grins. Maybe one day they'll hang in a museum and people will pay to sniff them. You chuckle quietly, realizing how close she came to truth. Centuries later, relics of Napoleon's clothing indeed sit behind glass. Laundry during campaigns was harsher still. Soldiers boiled socks in kettles, beat them against stones, or simply wore them until they disintegrated. Valets improvised drying lines in tents, smoke staining fabric, rain undoing hours of work. Napoleon's pairs fared better. His staff guarded them as carefully as maps, but even emperors could not escape the laws of laundry. Mud clung, seams tore, and fabric shrank if dried too close to fire. One valet cursed softly. The emperor fears defeat, but I fear shrinkage. Historians still argue whether the emperor's insistence on cleanliness was practical or symbolic. Was he genuinely more hygienic than his contemporaries, or did his fuss over soap and seams merely project an image of order? The truth may be both. After all, in an age of lice and disease, clean fabric could mean survival. Socks, scrubbed and dried, became small shields against infection. Picture also the endless cycle of mending. Servants sat by candlelight, needles glinting, patching worn heels with fresh thread. Each stitch stretched a sock's life a little longer. Some patches grew so thick they resembled armor for toes. A valet joked, "These socks have survived 3 battles and 2 repairs. They deserve a medal." Another replied, "Award them the Order of the Soul." Their laughter, though soft, stitched warmth into weary nights. And beyond the palace, ordinary families mirrored the cycle. Mothers scrubbed children's stockings by river banks. Women in villages boiled woolens. Men cursed when socks shrank smaller than their feet. Everyone, from emperor to farmer, bowed to the same truth. Fabric must be washed, or it betrays. This strange democracy of laundry binds all lives together. Threads, crossing class, wealth, and power. You linger a moment by the wash lines, socks fluttering in wind like banners. They flap proudly, plain and humble, proclaiming nothing yet representing everything: order, survival, dignity. You think of Napoleon pacing in his drawers, unaware of the hands that scrub, rinse, mend. The empire may collapse, battles may rage, but someone, somewhere, is always washing his socks. There is a comforting absurdity in this. While Europe shifts under armies, a washerwoman still bends to scrub, grumbling about soap, her laughter bubbling between complaints. While emperors negotiate treaties, servants shake fabric out to dry. History thunders, but laundry hums steadily on. Perhaps that's why socks matter. They remind us that beneath crowns and cannons lies water, soap, and the steady rhythm of hands keeping life clean. As evening falls, the courtyard empties, steam fading into night air. The last socks hang quiet, dripping softly. Inside the palace, drawers wait, ready to be restocked. You smile, realizing that tomorrow the cycle repeats. Empires may rise and fall, but laundry never ends. You drift further now, into the curious afterlife of objects, where socks, yes, even socks, outlive their wearer in whispers, museums, and collectors' drawers. Napoleon's empire collapses, his body carried eventually to St. Helena, and yet fabric remains. Threads that once clung to his ankles, now preserved behind glass, tell stories as loudly as marble statues or oil paintings. You find yourself in hushed galleries, your footsteps softened on wooden floors, where visitors lean close to examine tiny relics once touched by history. A historical fact grounds you. The French Army Museum in Paris and other collections hold garments attributed to Napoleon, including gloves, boots, and yes, fragments of stockings. These relics became objects of fascination in the 19th century, treasured by loyalists and mocked by satirists. A quirky tidbit surfaces from auction records. In the decades after his death, socks allegedly worn by Napoleon were sold for startling sums, sometimes accompanied by dubious certificates of authenticity. Historians still argue whether half these relics are genuine or whether eager collectors bought ordinary wool dressed up in imperial legend. Picture the auction room in the 1820s. The air is thick with perfume, cigar smoke, and anticipation. On a velvet cushion rests a simple pair of white stockings. The auctioneer declares, "Worn by the emperor himself." Bidders raise hands, voices rise, coins clink. Someone whispers, "Imagine, his very footsteps linger there." Another mutters, "Or perhaps just some laundress's sewing project." You chuckle softly at the absurdity. Socks, once sweated through, now treated as holy relics. In private homes, collectors guard their treasures. One aristocrat boasts to his guests, "Here, Napoleon's sock, worn at Austerlitz." He waves it dramatically, though moth holes gape. His wife rolls her eyes, whispering, "It smells more of attic than empire." You imagine guests forcing polite nods, inwardly wondering how many toes once poked through those threads. Meanwhile, museums grow reverent. Curators place stockings beneath glass, label them in elegant script, control temperature and humidity as if guarding jewels. Visitors lean close, squinting at faint stitches, imagining history alive in fabric. You drift among them, hearing whispers. "So small," one marvels. "So ordinary," another sighs. Indeed, socks shrink empires into intimacy, reducing grandeur to human scale. But satire strikes too. Cartoonists in London gleefully mocked French reverence for relics, sketching caricatures of admirers bowing before framed socks. Pamphleteers joked, "Soon they will canonize his laundry." The humor stings, yet reveals a truth. Humans cling to objects, because they make giants feel touchable. You picture St. Helena, where Napoleon lived his final years. There, far from courts and campaigns, his possessions became precious. Servants treasured even worn garments as mementos. Some socks likely remained there, darned and redarned, until passed quietly into collectors' hands. Each thread carried exile's melancholy, as if fabric itself absorbed the island's isolation. Later, in the 1840s, when his body returned triumphantly to Paris, relics surged in value. Loyalists scrambled to own a piece of him. Locks of hair, scraps of uniform, stockings folded carefully in boxes. To hold such an object was to claim intimacy with greatness, to feel history brushing your fingertips. And yet, scholars remind us gently, historians still argue whether the majority of these socks truly belonged to Napoleon, or whether wishful thinking embroidered truth with myth. There's humor even in reverence. Imagine a family heirloom passed down. This was Napoleon's sock, the grandfather proclaims. The child frowns. But why only one? Silence follows, then nervous laughter. You realize how fragile legends are, unraveling like worn fabric under too much tugging. Still, the fascination endures. Modern visitors in Paris wander past gleaming armor, gilded swords, grand portraits, and then pause longest at a humble sock behind glass. Something about fabric, intimate and ordinary, draws them closer than gold or steel. It whispers, this man sweated, paced, lived. He was not just emperor, but human, with toes that wore holes like anyone else. Scholars analyze fibers, trace stitching patterns, compare dye batches, chasing authenticity thread by thread. Was this stocking woven in lion? Was that patch sewn by an imperial valet? You smile at the dedication. Empires debated, treaties signed, battles lost, and here, centuries later, people argue over a sock seam. Yet perhaps that's the charm. Great history stitched into small things. You walk slowly out of the gallery, the glass case fading behind you. The echo of visitors' whispers lingers, awe, doubt, amusement. Napoleon's socks remain, fragile yet stubborn, refusing to vanish. In their afterlife, they outlast armies, remind us that history is not only cannon fire, but cloth, worn thin, folded, preserved. You drift now into the curious landscape of memory, where Napoleon no longer paces in palaces or marches through snow, but lingers instead in the imagination of those who tell his story. And strangely, socks, those soft, unremarkable things, become part of how the world remembers him. The empire is gone, the man is buried, yet in conversation, satire, scholarship, and even school lessons, his hosiery keeps peeking out from beneath the weight of crowns and cannons. A historical fact sets the frame. During the 19th century, Napoleon became a symbol of both heroism and tyranny, inspiring countless biographies, caricatures, and romantic tales. His personal habits, what he ate, how he dressed, even how he folded, were scrutinized endlessly. A quirky tidbit floats in from Victorian Britain. Children's magazines sometimes printed anecdotes about Napoleon's neatness with socks as moral lessons about discipline. Historians still argue whether such stories were factual or invented to humanize him for audiences who preferred quirky domestic details over complex politics. Picture a classroom in 1850. The teacher, spectacles perched on nose, reads from a little book. Napoleon, though emperor, insisted his socks be folded with care. Children, let this remind you to keep order even in small tasks. The children giggle, imagining the great general scolding over wrinkled stockings. One boy whispers, "Did he conquer Europe with socks?" Another answers, "Maybe he tripped an enemy with one." The class bursts into laughter before the teacher hushes them sternly. Still, the story lodges in their memory, making Napoleon less a distant statue and more a man with drawers as tidy as any schoolboy's. In drawing rooms, conversations flow over tea. Ladies recall reading memoirs describing the emperor's morning rituals, including his meticulous choice of hosiery. Gentlemen debate whether such details reveal strength of character or trivial vanity. One scoffs, "What empire rests on socks?" Another replies, "All empires rest on something small." The room chuckles, yet the idea sticks. History can hinge on fabric as much as on treaties. Satirists, of course, had their fun. British cartoonists exaggerated Napoleon's small stature by sketching him perched on giant socks, as if he required them to look taller. Pamphlets joked that the emperor planned to blockade Britain not with ships, but with stockings stretched across the channel. You can almost hear the laughter in smoky taverns as men slap tables and declare, "At least socks are warmer than treaties." The absurdity carries its own truth. Humor keeps history alive, and socks made him approachable, if ridiculous. Meanwhile, scholars debated earnestly. Was Napoleon's obsession with neatness, socks included, a reflection of his disciplined mind, the same precision that guided armies? Or was it evidence of compulsion, small habits, betraying a restless soul? Historians still argue, their essays filled with footnotes, pun intended, yet no conclusion settles. The socks remain, folded enigmas in museum drawers. The memory of socks even slips into literature. Romantic writers, eager to humanize the giant, mention his wardrobe with almost tender detail. The emperor, though burdened by nations, yet cared for the fold of his stockings, one poet mused. It reads silly now, but then it struck chords of intimacy, showing that greatness carried threads of ordinariness. Public commemorations play with these images too. In centennial exhibitions, alongside cannons and uniforms, curators occasionally displayed simple garments. Visitors gasped more at stockings than at sabers, whispering, "He wore these." The ordinariness of fabric pierced the grandeur, reminding them that emperors sweat, fret, and change socks like everyone else. There's humor in how memory distills. Soldiers who fought under him told grandchildren not only of battles, but of the emperor's sharp eye for detail, how he noticed a soldier's torn bootlace or a valet's crooked fold. Over time, stories exaggerated, until Napoleon became the man who could command nations yet lose his temper at mismatched socks. Perhaps untrue, but endlessly retold. Imagine a fireside in 1880. An old veteran leans back, children gathered around. He growls, "The emperor checked us as sharply as his drawers. Socks out of order," and he'd frown like a thundercloud. The children widen eyes, picturing their hero looming over laundry. They laugh nervously, yet remember the tale long after the veteran's voice fades. And into the 20th century, the sock stories survive still, passed in classrooms, printed in curiosities, whispered in museums. Historians sigh, trying to sift fact from embroidery. Yet the persistence itself matters. Socks, of all things, keep Napoleon alive in memory, not as an untouchable icon, but as a man of rituals, quirks, and fabric. So you walk through this memory-scape, hearing voices echo, laughter of children, debates of scholars, jeers of satirists, pride of collectors, all thread together, weaving socks into the tapestry of legacy. And you realize something oddly comforting. Even when history strains to monumental heights, it is the little details, creases in cotton, warmth of wool, that slip most easily into human hearts. You reach the last stretch of the tale, the place where socks no longer lie only in drawers or auctions, but instead drift into legend, woven into the way Napoleon is remembered in the collective imagination. Memory transforms them into symbols, objects less about fabric and more about meaning. They're not just wool or cotton anymore. They are metaphors for discipline, order, and the odd intimacy that history sometimes grants us with great figures. A grounding historical fact sets the scene. By the 20th century, Napoleon's image had become part of global culture, influencing not only politics, but also advertising, art, and even children's toys. His silhouette, with bicorn hat and hand tucked into waistcoat, appeared everywhere. In this flood of imagery, the tiniest domestic details, like socks, became comic shorthand for the man behind the myth. A quirky tidbit pops up in French humor magazines from the 1920s. Cartoon strips showed Napoleon losing battles not to Wellington, but to missing pairs of socks, as if the downfall of empires could be traced to Laundry Day. Historians still argue whether the persistence of these trivial anecdotes reflects genuine interest in his private life or simply the human need to shrink giants down to relatable size. You picture a theater in Paris between the wars. On stage, an actor dressed as the emperor delivers grand speeches about destiny, only to be interrupted by a servant announcing, "Sire, your socks are unmatched." The audience roars with laughter. The point isn't accuracy, it's intimacy, the pleasure of imagining that history's titans were just as vexed by crooked laundry as anyone else. Over time, educators caught on to this too. Textbooks aimed at younger students often softened Napoleon's military ferocity by including anecdotes about his daily routines. He cared even for the fold of his socks, one lesson reads, using the detail as shorthand for meticulousness. Children smiled, remembering him not as a distant conqueror, but as someone whose valet might scold, "No, sire, the toes go this way." In museums, the fascination with personal relics remained steady. Behind glass, stockings attributed to Napoleon continued to draw whispers, visitors pressing close, eager for a glimpse of something so mundane, yet so charged with history. A young tourist in 1969 might stand amazed. Men had walked on the moon, and yet here, socks from 2 centuries earlier still carried power to stir awe. The contrast is almost absurd, but it reveals something tender, the desire to connect across time through objects we understand with our own bodies. And as culture globalized, so did the jokes. Comic strips in Japan and political cartoons in South America poked fun at the emperor's supposed obsession with order, often symbolized by endless piles of socks. Even video games in the late 20th century slipped in Easter eggs, tiny references to laundry or clothing piles, winkingly connecting players to old legends. History and humor overlapped, socks becoming shorthand for the human beneath the hat. You wander into the quieter realm of scholarship, where academics continue their debates. Was Napoleon's reputation for tidiness exaggerated, a legend embroidered by memoirists eager to humanize him? Or did his attention to detail, visible in folded garments, truly reflect the same mind that planned campaigns? Historians still argue, Papers published in journals weigh the evidence of valets' testimonies, letters, and surviving artifacts. The arguments grow technical. Fiber analysis, stitch comparison, even chemical tests for dyes. Yet beneath the seriousness lies the same curiosity that drives everyone else. What kind of man fussed over socks while commanding armies? Imagine, though, the way memory works around the dinner table. A parent tells a child, Napoleon was the greatest general of his age. And do you know? He folded his socks carefully. The child laughs, picturing the emperor crouched in lamplight, smoothing fabric with calloused hands. That laughter ensures the story survives another generation, not as dry fact, but as vivid image. Legends tend to bend toward exaggeration. Some retellings insist he could identify a soldier by his socks. Others, that he never wore mismatched pairs even in campaign tents. These are unlikely, of course, but like all myths, they reveal more about storytellers than about the man himself. They reveal the yearning to find in greatness something approachable, something recognizable in our daily routines. So here you stand, at the edge of the story, watching socks transform from cloth to relic, from relic to anecdote, from anecdote to legend. Empires collapse, battles fade, but the detail lingers. And you realize the strange beauty in that. History is not only cannons, crowns, and treaties. It is also drawers, laundry, and the hum of daily ritual. The museum lights dim in your imagination, leaving only the soft glow over a glass case where a single folded sock rests. The crowds have gone. Silence spreads like a blanket. You lean closer, but not to scrutinize, just to feel the calm hum of time, the reminder that even the greatest figures walked on tired feet, wrapped in wool. The fabric is frayed, the stitches loose, yet it endures, a quiet survivor of centuries. Your breathing eases with the rhythm of this thought. Empires may crash like waves, armies may thunder across fields, but socks remain, soft and stubborn. They hold memory not in marble, but in thread. And in their ordinariness lies a comfort, that history, no matter how grand, is woven of small things, the same kind of things that fill your own drawers tonight. The story fades, leaving you in a slower, softer world. The sounds around you blur into quiet hums, like wind through curtains or a distant fan. Your eyelids grow heavier, each blink longer than the last. You feel as though you folded the final pair, placed it neatly away, and stepped back with a sigh. And in that sigh rests peace. No battles, no debates, no auctions, only calm fabric, still and settled. Let the image hold you, a single sock in the quiet, the empire of sleep stretching wide beyond it. You have traveled far, and now it is time to rest.